This is down in Sandy, right up against Dimple Dell. So I got a call about this colony being unproductive, not doing anything, not much going on at the entrance, and nothing much here. She started with a package, or maybe it was early May, and they have not done anything. Nasty looking brood. It looks like drone brood, and here's a drone about the size of a worker. That indicates that drone was reared in a worker's cell, and that starts to suggest a laying worker or a failing queen. It could be either one of those things. Looking down into the cells, we're seeing mostly single eggs, but they're all over the place on the sidewalls. Some of them are centered. Some of them look like they could be laid by a queen, but most of them don't look that way. This looks like a wax moth tunneling through, and these larvae look very underfed, malnourished. There is still some nursing going on. Here's some emerging drones being fed. How long has this bee been a nurse? How long has this been going on? So we can just run some quick numbers and try to figure that out. It would take 3 weeks to become broodless. It takes roughly 2 weeks of broodlessness and queenlessness for laying workers to develop. Initially, when workers begin to lay, there's a lot of competition, and there's a lot of bees laying in the cells, and there's still worker policing going on. There's still bees that are removing those eggs because they know they're not eggs from the queen. So you have this conflict happening in the early stages. So we're going to add another week for that to take place. It's going to take another 3 weeks for 3.5 actually for the bee to develop into a drone, and then we see adult drones walking around. So we'll just conservatively say they're at least a week old, and you add all that up in 10 weeks, at minimum. They haven't had a queen since late June or earlier. This beekeeper has a pet polar bear, by the way, and also has a pet dog. Anyway, there's no stores here. That suggests that this colony lost their queen much earlier. Otherwise, we would see some production, or at least some signs of robbing. And I see neither of those things. I see a superseder cell, very common to see in a laying worker hive. They're always trying to fix the problem. It could be that this colony never had a queen. The package rejected her, or they swarmed and failed to rear a new one, or even absconded. Fortunately, there's some research to guide us here. 4 nukes were made queenless and also given a high mite load. The lifespan of these 4 colonies ranged from 61 to 111 days, so an average of 89 days. And that was with a high mite load. So certainly 120 days for a package is totally reasonable. How is that possible? Brood rearing reduces lifespan. They're giving up their protein stores. So while it's assumed that a honeybee will live 6 to 8 weeks in the spring, and that's normally true, but when they're spared the job of feeding larvae, their lifespan increases. In this study, half of all the bees were dead in 25 days after queen loss. But it took 74 days for 95% of the bees to die off. So half the population was able to triple their lifespan. My purpose here is disease management. In that respect, a laying worker colony, the brood looks nasty, but it's typically the result of poor brood care. And even in this research paper that I've referenced, no diseases were detected, even though brood was dying. 5% of eggs laid by workers actually matured into an adult drone. And when brood starts dying from being poorly incubated or underfed, it does start to look like a diseased colony. Some things to know about a laying worker colony. So very common to see supersedure cells. They'll try to make a queen out of a drone. So maybe the most interesting thing is this part right here. I mean, doesn't the fact that all of these bees want to be the queen suggest that she's more than just a slave? They all want to be her. Who lines up to take the place of a slave? Nobody lines up to be a slave. But that's, I guess, only true if honeybees think like people do, and I don't think they probably do. So, maybe for a honeybee worker, to be a slave is like a dream come true. It's hard to think like a bee when you're not a bee. Maybe she's not a slave. Maybe she's a queen. Eventually, one of the workers will emerge as dominant, and when that happens, that worker begins producing queen pheromone. That queen pheromone not only attracts a court of caretakers, it also suppresses other bees from laying. Lifespan increases. We've gone over that. That's pretty important. And then lastly, the drones produced by laying workers do have fully functional reproductive ability. But this idea that a laying worker colony is somehow sending out all these drones and they're mating and keeping the genetics alive, it's a lot more like a Hail Mary pass, because it's not very likely any of these drones will mate with a queen, because they're smaller, they don't have the physical strength.
Oh my gosh! How did that happen? It was batted back into the arms of Mike Thomas, and the Jaguars have won it! Holy cow! That's unbelievable! Hail Mary!
I can't totally rule out a failing queen. It would look much like this. If you're a beekeeper, there might be a fix here. There are different schemes for introducing the queen, but you won't be doing them any favors. Bringing a new queen in is bringing a new colony in. So this colony here is dead. A laying worker colony is a dead colony.